It's Bruno and Aaron McDonald. Bruno, of course, from RMRK, and Aaron, the founder of a gazillion companies, foremost amongst which, of course, is Flufworld, the Futureverse, Alt State Machine, Silo. I mean, it goes on and on and on. You're an absolute legend. And finally, we have managed to get this band of brothers together to talk about the Futureverse. Aaron, I know it's really late where you are, but thank you so much for joining us. And Bruno,
yeah, no problem
awesome to
at
have
all.
you again. Bruno, do you want to kick it off, or shall I kick it off? I mean, there's one burning question we have on our lips, which is the big blue ripple. Aaron, talk us through this one.
Shoot, guys, shoot. So I think the first thing that's really important to understand is the nature of the integration. So when we talk about the connectivity with XRPL, we need to understand that the root network is an independent network. So it's its own layer one, and it's built on top of Substrate. And we've built a bunch of custom runtimes inside of Substrate, which allow us to get the user onboarding experience goals that we've been talking about in the Futureverse white paper, and also and also to provide connectivity to other networks. The open metaverse, we've said it a million times, is about building bridges and not building islands. And so in the same way that we bridge the root network to the Ethereum network and support Ethereum's EVM inside of the root network, which allows us to connect assets and users into root network functionality without those users having to change much about what they do. They can use MetaMask, for example. The contracts that they have been used to interacting with in the past can interact with contracts on the root network through the state bridge. We're doing the same thing connecting to XRPL. And so the root network will run a runtime which mimics a sidechain of XRPL and will allow users within the Ripple ecosystem to connect their assets and wallets and applications through to the root network and interact with them. And this is the first of two, the first two of what I would say is a number of different bridges that we'll be building in the future to connect to other layer one or layer two communities, so that those users and those assets can then come and gain these superpowers within the root network itself. And even the root network as a connector of layer twos of its own. So as we start to scale out and bring on more users and larger audiences and bigger applications, that scaling of the root network will allow for what we're calling optimistic parachains to be connected to the root network. And we'll start to talk a little bit more about that and extend the white paper to cover that topic in the future. So it's really about building connectivity out to where the users are. And if you look at the kind of overall Web3 landscape, there's about 1.3 million active wallets on XRPL. It's one of the largest Web3 communities out there. And those users haven't had the ability to do a whole lot with their assets and that network apart from kind of trading the token. And so we have the opportunity now to connect to those users, embrace them, and invite them to start to participate in some of the sexier side of Web3, and to put their assets to work in applications and content that they may never have had the chance to do before. And so we think it's a really exciting opportunity to extend connectivity to that community and start to give them the option to do more with their tokens and interact more with the applications that they already have.
So was this a decision motivated by the notion that a metaverse needs to be a social experience and you need to have users to actually be there?
Yeah,
and
and
that was
I think like you can look at the landscape out there and see really easily look that there are these kind of islands of opportunity, you know, and there's two like strategies you can take when you're looking to grow. You can try and fight in the red ocean and launch, you know, another EVM Ethereum sidechain layer 2 and try and like reach into the pool of people that are doing the same thing to find new users. Or you can go to blue ocean and you can connect to a whole new community that isn't being reached by other people. And so as a business strategy, it's a really exciting opportunity because it's an untouched, you know, kind of resource and community out there that we can start to offer new functionality to that they may never have seen before.
Yeah, as a business opportunity, get it. As a marketing opportunity, it's a headache because the Ripple name carries with it. It's a lot of negative association that comes with that.
I think that is true. And I'd say that, you know, they're a villain for a number of reasons which are probably unfair, and some reasons which might be fair. And I think if you look past that kind of the obvious kind of tropes that get thrown around, and look through to the users at the end of the day. I mean, even if you believe all of those negative things, what do you do in a situation like that? I'm not saying I do, but if you did, what do you do? Do you kind of extend an olive branch to help them, you know, experience the real Web3, as everyone else would put it, or do you kind of leave them stranded on an island? Like, what's the noble thing to do there? One path you can take, you know, you get lots of pats on the back, but you change nothing. And the other one, you take a bit of heat and you change something. You know, I'd rather do the thing that makes a difference than get patted on the back.
So Bruno, I remember your reaction when it dropped. You DM'd me on Twitter immediately and you said, oh, you know what you said. What's your take on all of this? Where are you coming with all this? Because you and I were so excited about this when we unpacked the Futureverse white paper a couple of weeks back.
Yeah. I'm not sold on this. I don't think we can actually have a productive conversation about the pros and cons of Ripple because you're already partnered, and obviously you can't really. I don't personally think like you can objectively discuss some of the downsides, which is normal. I know I've been in a similar situation, so I don't think we can really dive super deep into it.
I'd be more than happy to, and I think many people's perception of the downsides is actually rooted in ignorance about how things actually work in Web3, and I've had a number of conversations so far, and people are like, "Oh, it's not decentralized." Okay, well, let's actually talk about that. And if you want to talk about what is and isn't decentralized in Web3, that's a fucking interesting conversation.
It is.
And I think, you know, there's more than one network that you will love and feel dear to that is wearing the emperor's clothes in that respect. And so that's an easy conversation to have from my perspective, because there's a whole lot of bullshit out there that people overlook. And if you talk about the kind of technical protocol level, actually it's no different to any proof of work network. The the structure of XRPL in terms of the protocol itself. I've read the white paper and talked to the founder of the protocol, and it works very much like proof of work does. And so, but at a technical level, those arguments are pretty bad. I mean, I think you could say at an economic level, there's definitely some questions to be had around distribution of tokens, but they actually have no impact on decentralization in either Ethereum or Bitcoin in proof of work. So, so that argument does have some merit, but it doesn't have any merit relative to what people usually talk about in terms of centralization. And I'd be very happy to have those in-depth conversations, because I feel very confident that most people misunderstand what is and isn't there.
Yeah, for sure. I mean,
but at the same time, I don't like. Let's be really clear: the root network is the root network. It's its own thing. And
yeah, that's probably where
by the way, there are already bridges between XRP and other blockchains out there. Like, this isn't a new thing, and one of those blockchains is Ethereum. It doesn't mean there's anything wrong with Ethereum because that bridge exists.
No, I think the issue here is that you've taken an NFT project and extended its capabilities and extended its scope to intersect with what layer ones do. Solana is now facing a lawsuit for being, quote unquote, centralized. The SEC versus Ripple lawsuit is still bubbling around and still doing what it's doing.
Yeah.
And I go back to the time
on that front, like that, we're not stupid. We know that exists, and we did our diligence around the likely outcomes of that. And I think you have to, again, be really honest and realistic about that situation. Yes, they're the ones in the firing line now, but if the SEC is successful in this pursuit, do you think any of your favorite projects that have launched tokens are not next in line? Like, people think they're cleverer than they actually are, and most of them have no fucking idea about how the regulatory and framework works in practice. And they think they've come up with smart ways to do distributions that mean that they're out of the firing range, but they are absolutely and most certainly not. So if they lose, like, we all lose. Like, mark my words, this is an industry problem. It is not a problem for them alone. And in some ways, I'm fucking glad that it's them, because they have an extremely professional team. They're extremely well resourced. And if it was, name your favorite project that got picked up instead of them, because they all could have, we'd be in a much worse situation as an industry if that was the outcome.
Yeah, it's telling that most people have no idea how layer ones work, and they have no idea how validators actually function and how validator communities function, and how many validator nodes are hosted on AWS. I mean, that's the dirty dark secret of all of this.
Yeah.
It's, you have this beautiful Web3 decentralized system entirely hosted, well, not entirely, but kind of predominantly hosted on Amazon.
Yeah, and when Cloudflare goes down, so does all of Web3. Like, again, being honest about where the architecture is right now. I mean, it doesn't mean we shouldn't keep trying to make it better, but we also have to be realistic. And you talk about validators within the ledger. Anyone can choose to be a validator. There's no process you have to go through to do that, and any node can choose which other nodes it wants to listen to as validators, in the same way that you could do that within proof of work. So the notion that the validation process within the ledger is centralized is also fundamentally flawed.
And it's a
And I
sliding
think-
scale. It's a sliding scale.
And
Like,
yeah.
at what point do we determine that something is decentralized or not? And nobody has an answer to that because it's bullshit. It's like
It's all
Bitcoin is
bullshit.
the standard, but like, who determines that that's the standard? Ethereum, like, what is it, 11,000 nodes? But it fluctuates. You know, at
Yeah.
what point? I remember we struggled at Harmony to get 1,000 nodes. Like getting to 1,000 nodes external, it's
Yeah.
really, really hard because running nodes sucks. It's a
Yeah.
horrible thing to do. It's
And
basically
there's also the argument that, I mean, there's two other arguments around decentralization that I think are really important. And one is that decentralization is the sum of all of the activities that exist within Web3. It's not a specific network architecture. It's the fact that there are many options. And so if we were like, you know, the only path to decentralization is to follow Bitcoin's model because they've got the most decentralization. Well, you know, A, that's a weak argument, but B, then it's not decentralized anymore. You know, like the idea of decentralization is there are multiple choices and multiple options, and communities can choose the ones that they believe in and want to get behind. And the sum of everything is decentralization, not having, you know, one thing that represents all of Web3. I think the other thing that's really important is network infrastructure needs to be application specific. You know, this is the whole substrate Polkadot meme, is that application specific chains need to exist because different apps have different kinds of requirements for performance and the type of applications that run on top of that infrastructure. And so so you have a collective group of different network architectures that suit different kinds of applications.
That brings me to the point. Bruno, you're wearing a Polkadot t-shirt. It's like you dress for the occasion. It's beautiful. And that is the point of, you know, why we have this group of people together, because Bruno, you've invested an enormous amount of time in Substrate as a platform for everything you're doing. So I'm curious if you have questions for Aaron as to why they picked Substrate, or any other questions you have about the technical foundation.
I kind of understand why they picked Substrate. Substrate is objectively an awesome framework to build on. It
really is. And what we actually picked was the best of breed across Web3. So, you know, we've got Substrate as a baseline, but we use EVM because it has the broadest developer community, you know. So it's not about, you know, saying one thing is the best and that's the only religion we follow. It's actually, we've actually looked across the broad ecosystem of Web3 protocols and said, okay, well, what one does the best job in each one of these areas?
Yeah, it's kind of actually ironic that most Substrate chains that launched have the EVM palette built in. And so now almost every Substrate chain that's out there is also EVM compatible. So we've actually gained nothing in terms of the customization that it offers. There is some innovation happening, like the Akala chain they developed this EVM plus thing that has EVM, but plus some very, very useful things. But in general, everybody just uses the EVM. Now, I have spent quite a bit of time in Bitcoin before I realized that it was the, you know, primordial shitcoin that's never going to move from its like you know, rock fixed.
No,
position.
but that's the kind of thing that is bad about this space. Like, Bitcoin has a job to do, and that job can probably only be done by a proof of work protocol. Like,
I don't know.
It wouldn't make sense to do what Bitcoin's trying to do in a proof of stake network.
I don't think it's trying to do anything. I would throw it all away. I would chuck it all in the bin. It forms the same kind of role that gold does, in that gold is essentially it's essentially a capture of energy costs. I disagree.
That's what
completely.
it is.
I completely
like the
disagree.
price of gold is aligned to how much diesel it costs to burn to find the gold.
All right, gold, yes, but I disagree that Bitcoin has any value whatsoever, and is in any way similar to.
That's
similar
that's
to
very
gold.
philosophical. It has value because people believe it has value.
Okay, indeed.
Okay, well let's move on from Bitcoin because we're not here to talk about Bitcoin.
But then I spent a lot of time in Ethereum too, just generally working on the Nimbus client with the status guys and everything. And this is where the real like decentralization kicks in, and it gets really fun. But then I also spent a lot of time in Polkadot and Kusama and that ecosystem, and I'm confused. Like all the other, like I've seen, like I can be the bad guy here and say that I've seen a lot of whataboutisms in the discussion so far, which I do not agree with. Like the decentralization aspect, you don't justify the lack of decentralization in a protocol by saying, but this other thing is not decentralized either. That's not the way it works. But I'm confused by why you would go with Ripple when all the other criticisms aside, and the fact that it doesn't really have a Web3 developer ecosystem, why would you go there versus an established economic security of Polkadot, where you can just plug your chain in and have that inherited shared security with the largest Web3 developer ecosystem in the space? That's
maybe we'll get there. But as you know, it's a journey to get into running a parachain within there.
It's actually really easy. There's way more slots than demand right now, and it is super cheap to get a slot.
Yeah, and maybe we'll end up there.
But that doesn't.
I wouldn't rule that out as an option for connectivity.
Okay, because I mean, like that literally.
Like I said, we're about building bridges, not building islands.
Yeah, but that's what I'm saying. Like by joining that ecosystem, you don't need a bridge. You're implicitly bridged to everything in a secure way. You don't need a separate incentivization layer for the bridging. Like, how does the bridge work from Ethereum to Ripple right now?
In terms of the actual architecture?
No, in terms of like economic security.
Very similar to most bridges out there. Someone runs a node on one side and someone runs a node on the other side.
There you go. So it's another chain of single points of failure. Whereas,
by and large, that's how most of the bridges out there work.
Exactly, except if you go with Polkadot and inherit the shared security, and you get I don't want to be like the Polkadot maxi here. There's a ton of things I disagree with in Polkadot, but the bridging is really well done, because you can really read NFT states across chains. You can really transport everything securely across chains. You can send arbitrary messages.
We have a state bridge that allows us to do that to arbitrary trains.
But how is it secured?
What, the state bridge?
Yeah.
We have witnesses on either side, so you can independent node validators can be witnesses to transaction on either side.
Independent node validators of each chain, or just the bridge?
No, of each chain.
Okay,
so it's up to the application to choose how much diversity they want in witnesses of a particular application.
Okay, so here's where I would say that optional security is not security. So it's like if you have optional anonymity, like in some ZK chains and whatever, you don't have anonymity at all. If there's a choice, then
those are different arguments.
Is it?
Yeah, definitely.
How?
Because in the case of an anonymity, it's an all or nothing scenario. Yeah. In the case of security, it's different horses for different courses. Like depending on the application use case, you have different security models. That's how the real world works. We don't all use the same security model for every application we interact with.
No,
and those application developers don't all build the same security model into their applications.
Of course, but you're talking about bridging here. So everything is by definition only as secure as the weakest link. And so if you do some lending or whatever.
Yeah, so if you did lending, then you would choose a really strong security posture.
How would you though, if it's simpler not to, and you're just an application developer who wants to push things out?
Well, it's still a choice you can make.
Exactly.
So people can choose to have a high grade of security in that implementation or not.
Developers, not people.
Developers.
Yeah. That's what I'm saying. Like, I wouldn't give developers that opportunity, because they will, when given the choice, make things less secure in the face.
Some will,
in the choice of
and some
convenience.
won't. Some will and some won't. You can't say that everyone will.
No, not everyone, but some will. And this is what I'm saying. It's only as secure as the weakest link. So the whole system is going to be as secure as the laziest developer, right?
Well, in a particular application.
Yeah.
Yeah, not the whole system though.
No, not the whole system, but it depends on how many things you connect. It's like in Cosmos, like you have like a chain that may be less secure than the other one, and if you bridge assets to the more secure one, but the less secure one gets hacked and that transaction gets reverted, what happens to the orphaned money on the more expensive chain? Everything is wrecked.
Yeah. The whole thing's a mess.
Yeah, the whole thing's a mess. And then you have now the optional shared security that they've added. But again, it's optional. And so of course, most chains will not opt to it. And so again, you have the weakest link problem. This is why I'm advocating connectivity.
Over time that will change, and people will make decisions to, in terms of the applications they use based on the historical performance of those applications. And the space will weed out bad developers, and good developers will remain.
I wish that were true. But you can see these DeFi apps crashing all around us. You can see people throwing money at the same thing. You can see it 0x collecting another 20 million for a new Wonderland or whatever else.
We're very, very early in the journey of this infrastructure, and no one has solved all of the problems yet, and the number of people building and the number of users using is infinitesimally small. So I don't feel like we're anywhere near a point of scale where we could say that that the outcomes I'm talking about in terms of user adoption won't happen.
No, 100%.
People will eventually, and just like they have in other technology paradigms, eventually will migrate to the things that they trust, and those things they trust will be the things that have been built well.
So this is where I disagree. Like, if you take the current audience, which is truly nothing compared to global numbers, if you take the current audience who were proficient enough to set up a wallet and try interacting with Web3, and you see how much trouble they get themselves into today, and then you take the great Carlinism into your mind, and think of how stupid the average person is, and then realize that half of them are dumber than that. If you bring in the next billion users who are barely able to dress themselves in the morning, and you give them Web3, they will not go where quality is. They will go where the news tells them, where the influencers tell them, where the celebrities tell them. They will go where they see the advertisements, the marketing. They will not go where the quality is. They will go into the Wonderlands and Seafoods. They will not go into the,
To begin with.
Yeah. I mean, how many people do we need to burn before we collectively as a civilization get the generational knowledge to avoid these pitfalls?
You're talking about a marketing problem. You're talking about a marketing problem here, and this is where I sit in all of this, because I make the content. I am an influencer. I don't want to be an influencer, but I am, which is why I invite opposing views, but also complementary views onto a discussion so we can actually talk about it. And people in the comments are hating on Bruno, but it's not an invalid argument. It's not an invalid point of view, because
it's not at all. It's the point of this. It's the point of the Futureverse that we need to make this process simpler and safer.
Yeah. Yep. And so this whole concept.
And by the way,
onboarding.
Polkadot doesn't solve that problem.
Which one?
The user onboarding journey and the user safety.
No. No, it's terrible.
Yeah.
So I think our missions are kind of aligned in many senses, because what we want to do is make it safer and easier for people to get a taste of this, because that's basically all we can hope for. They get a taste of it, and then maybe they go further, and there's a bigger journey. And we hope that they're smart enough and sensible enough and well counseled enough to go further with it. And that's why these Discord communities grow up. I'd like to move away from Ripple now, because I think we should, because we've been there. But I'd like to dwell on digital identity. I had Evan McMullen from Disco.xyz on last week, and we were talking specifically about DIDs. Aaron, what's
Yeah,
your?
we were chatting up in NFT NYC. We hung out quite a bit.
She's great. So what's your take on identity? How important is it going to be for the metaverse?
I think if you look at like the infrastructure stack, the bottom layer of infrastructure is actually identity, and if we get that layer right, it'll make everything else more usable. And what we've done within the Futureverse kind of protocol stack is develop identity out into a service that can both enhance the end user's experience, but also enhance interoperability for assets and avatars. And so by using the W3C DID protocol spec and adapting that to work with avatars, we can start to solve some of the interoperability problems that we have on the asset layer. I think, if you look at like the notion of metaverse worlds being these kind of all-encompassing spaces that all of the content and all of the users can exist in, there's a whole plethora of problems that start to emerge that require identity to solve. For example, how do you shard users into user groups that are age appropriate, for example? Like if you're working with a content space that has, the potential for the crypto bro audience to clash with the TikTok girl audience, that's going to produce some like unsavory outcomes, and identity can help like solve some of those problems. Or age gated content, or as we will no doubt end up with more regulatory oversight and standards being applied to things like DeFi, the ability to do trustless, zero knowledge KYC, so that users can interact with those protocols. All of those things are reliant on identity to solve for and to enhance the user experience around the applications that are built in the metaverse, and not just like compliance related things or safety related things, but even like think about things like gameplay. We're talking with the Crypto Walkers team the other day about how do you make the player status or stats of a player from their game, one of their games, available inside one of our games, so that if you're a really high ranked player in the Crypto Walker game, that can show up in interactions or even in game mechanics inside a different game. You can do that using digital identity. So this is kind of super metadata layer that can exist outside of the NFTs and outside of the blockchain, that scales really well and that helps solve some of those fundamental usability issues.
Absolutely. Bruno, do you have any questions about DID? Because I know you got a little bit moist when we were discussing that bit.
No. I actually, these are very good use cases. I agree with all of them. I would kind of default to a Wild West and then add DID blocked, DID gated content based on user interest and preference, so that if you choose to go into the Wild West, you may. But if you want a cleaner or more specific experience, then yes, absolutely, you should.
But even in the Wild West, like there's a misconception that DIDs are something that takes away your ability to be anonymous or private. They don't. It's attestations on DIDs that do. DIDs are just numbers. It's just like a private key. A public key. You can sit behind a DID in exactly the same way you can sit behind a public key, and it's only when attestations are written to your DID that those factors around not being anonymous start to come into play. So So I wouldn't say that it's necessary to have no did to get the Wild West experience. You can still have a did and be in the Wild West.
No, yeah, but a DID without any attestations versus a DID with attestations carries a lot of extra implications.
Yeah.
So yeah, in
but
that
as a base layer, you could give every user a did.
Oh
and
yeah,
still,
yeah.
So we're talking about interoperability here. What's your vision of interoperability? What does that look like for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really broad question. I think the first way to kind of understand how I view it is we don't see the metaverse or a metaverse as an application that everything exists inside of. And so the notion that there's like a super app that everyone builds inside of is kind of a silly one. What we think will more likely evolve is lots and lots of applications. And so and for lots of different reasons, people will want to create specific user experiences for specific communities. People will want to create specific enterprise value around their own IP or their own brand. They won't want to be a Facebook page in someone else's app. People will want to curate the content experience inside of their applications. If you've spent decades building the lore and the languages and the characters and the landscapes around a piece of content, you don't want like every man and his dog dropping some character into that. It'd be stupid to see a Flufworld character appear in a realistic World War II simulation. Like that would just be dumb. So interoperability is much more about the data layer that sits below those applications users. So I want to be able to carry my identity between applications because that's a better user experience. Communications, I want to be able to chat with my friends between applications because that's a better experience. Data, so metadata that I have about me or about things that I've interacted. Currency, those are the things that I think need to be interoperable, and then potentially assets. And when you get to the asset layer, that's where you need this passporting system, because both asset creators and application creators need to have the optionality of including assets in their applications. And in some cases, like a battle royale experience, it'll make sense to chuck everything in there. In some cases, it won't. So having that passporting ability on the DID protocol apply to assets and avatars as well allows application developers to say, okay, these content items are passport stamped for my application, and that gives data to the user. So a marketplace could display which apps are supported by that piece of content, and that provides an interoperability step. So that's kind of how we're seeing like the hierarchy is like focus on the data essentially, and then the assets is kind of an optional layer that sits on top of it, and try and build infrastructure that supports lots of different applications as opposed to trying to build one super app that you try and scram everything inside.
Yeah, interesting. If you're just joining us, I'm Robin Schmidt from the Defiant. We're here with McDonald, founder of Flufworld and many others, and Bruno from RMRK and many others as well. Bruno, do you have any questions for Aaron? Maybe you can talk about what you've built on your side as well, and maybe get Aaron's wheels spinning a little bit.
Yeah, I'd love to hear something.
Yeah, so we've been focusing on this interoperability aspect from the get-go. Mainly on the asset compatibility side as well, so that we have these multi-resource NFTs that allow you in a fully decentralized way to share assets between games without depending on the game makers of these different games, but also while letting the target game team decide whether or not they want to welcome a new asset into the game, so that the spoiling can happen that you described. But what's more interesting to me is ownership of experience, and that's what you called the metadata and the data transfer compatibility there. So we call it ownership of experience, where your invested time into any experience doesn't have to be a game, can be a virtual concert, can be a virtual book reading session, whatever. It doesn't disappear when things go down, and also it helps dramatically in this world where every metaverse is just a multiplayer game that is running on expensive servers, and that is by definition vampire attacking other games when it launches, right? So every game that launches is just trying to compete for the same player base, running on the same server infrastructure, and going down when those players evaporate and go to the other game and stop feeding money into the system, which is a really, really bad idea. But in this case, like we have this kind of tech that doesn't let your environment go down if you don't want it to, but also if it does, your NFT contains all of the experience that you've collected in it. So we have this Soulbound 2.0 tech in here that we've had for a year plus, where, you know, if you have an avatar, or so it's easiest to explain on avatars, but it applies to anything. If you have an avatar in some sort of game, that avatar can collect a skill, and that's a non-transferable NFT inside of the transferable NFT that is the avatar. So it's bound to the avatar. A personality can be a non-transferable NFT. That avatar can also have a non-transferable brain NFT. That brain NFT can have skill slots inside of it. And since we support equipable NFTs on the protocol layer, you can equip these skills into some of these brain slots if you have room for them. And because all of our NFTs are multi-resource by default, you can collect non-transferable experience points in certain amounts. As you burn them, a new resource gets proposed to your NFT so that you get a level up and maybe new skill slots. And what's really fun about this is that even without RMRK having pivoted to being some sort of gaming company, project, whatever, we have nothing to do with gaming. It's just that our NFT 2.0 Legos are that flexible that they just lend themselves perfectly to a character progression system like this. This applies to music, you know, remixing music by equipping a new music filter, sharing royalties across everybody who contributed to that piece of music, equipping a new filter to a movie or whatever else you want to do, and also mixed media composables. So you can just make that movie then equipable into the background of your avatar, so that when you're viewing it in the marketplace, it by default shows it as a background. And all of this is natively supported to the point of being cross-chain and cross-collection compatible, where if you have a collection that comes out, it's automatically compatible with everything that came out in the past and everything that's going to come out in the future. So this is kind of, it's been at the core of our stuff since the beginning, and we have quite a few collections and games now being built using this tech and having been built that really utilize this to its fullest extent. But I think that one of the coolest aspects of this, apart from just a creator economy on steroids, because anybody can contribute anything to any project without needing to talk to the client developer team, who will then add it to their database, who will then add a database record that says if somebody logs in with a positive balance of this NFT, allow them to use this 3D model, none of that stuff. But what's even cooler maybe is that games don't really need a backend now, because you can have, well, I mean, of course you need a client where you run these concurrent connections and everything, but they don't need a backend in that, like if let's say you're building a civilization game, right? And you have some plots of land on the map, and let's say that each of these hexes is an NFT itself. And so if I have some units that are also NFTs, the only way for that unit to be in a hex, in a plot of land, is for that unit to be in that plot of land. And so I send that unit into the other NFT because we have these composables, right? We have these nested NFTs. My unit has to be literally in that piece of land. And so on the protocol level, I'm cheat resistant against spawning across the entire map. Whereas in the current metaverses, I can log into as many copies of that metaverse on the same machine as I want and play at the same time, as well as sell the NFT while I'm playing with it. So here, you not only allow a game not to have a backend, but also anybody to develop a custom UI for it, because it's all readable. All the game state is readable from the chain, which is, I think, really, really cool.
Well, this is the reason why we got excited about this, because Bruno, you and I have been talking for over a year about the need to kind of wake people up a little bit to what Substrate's capable of and how it works. And then suddenly you have this powerhouse of Kiwi developers who went, hey, we're building on Substrate. We went, what? So I'm curious, Aaron, where do your existing assets fit into all of this, and how do they come into Futureverse? How do they get printed over?
Yeah, I mean, so the kind of base case is that at the application layer, those applications could talk to both chains. So if you're kind of loading a fluff into the burrows, for example, there's no need for that asset to exist on the root network to begin with, because it can the application layer can talk to multiple chains. Like, applications are a really good bridge in their own right from that perspective for NFT assets. If the fluff asset wanted to interact with a new function that exists within a smart contract on the root network, then there are two ways that could happen. You could bridge your asset across, so you could bridge your NFT into the root network, and it would then exist as an NFT on the root network, and it could interact directly there. Or you could bridge the state, like we talked about earlier. So if that NFT did something on the ETH network, it could trigger a process on the root network. So there's three different ways that I think those assets will play out in terms of interoperability, and all of it's driven at the application layer. If we looked at something like the scenes and sound swap, that's a functionality that we think should be on the root network, because it's something you want to be able to do every day for a low gas cost. In that case, the scenes and sounds assets can be bridged into the root network, and therefore that when those swaps happen, they're happening on the root network, and at the same time they're actually doing the dynamic update to the Ethereum fluff. So you can have like those layers interoperating with each other as well. So the fluff could remain on the ETH network, but the assets that are driving the fluff's render, which song and which background it sits in, are actually on the layer too. So you can have kind of hybrid scenario as well.
It sounds so messy. It sounds so.
It isn't actually, and I think the key thing is that there's optionality for users, because some people will want to have their assets in that environment from a liquidity point of view, because it's the most liquid market to sell their asset. Some people won't care about that, and in terms of that user experience around the swappability, all of that complexity is obscured from the user in the underground UX. Like, they don't need to know that all of that shit's happening in the background. They're clicking a few buttons to do the swap. That's the whole point of building this infrastructure, is we obscure all of that complexity from the users. And I think the last part is, our growth path and the brands that we've partnered with and the IP that we've acquired the rights to, and the licenses we have, is onboarding 1,000 times more users than we have now. And all of those assets will be natively on the root network. So over time, the vast majority of the Futureverse ecosystem will be natively on the root network anyway.
At least that's the hope, I guess. That you go where you go where the activity is, and you go where the party's at.
We're building those applications, so it's not a hope for us; it's a reality.
It's a reality, yeah. Well, no, I mean, I'm not arguing with that. I think it's you're tackling the hardest piece of this, which is user acquisition.
Yeah,
and you have to make it a compelling experience for people to be there. One of the things that stood out was start small and allow it to grow organically, rather than build a massive universe of infinite possibility that is full of nothing. That's always been, I think, part of your roadmap, but I still struggle to in my head figure out what the Futureverse looks and feels like. And maybe you don't need to have that answer, but I was participating in the other side load test yesterday, and I got a sense of the chaos of all of those people together in an environment, and it was wild. It was wild. I was like, I don't want that. I don't need that. But actually, you're capable of that. And maybe if we had we had Snoop as a massive figure in this place, that could be really fun. And it was like technologically, that's a massive challenge. The networking side of it alone is vast. Do you have solutions for that already, or is it too soon to be?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. The first thing is the Futureverse isn't an app; it's infrastructure.
Yeah,
and so the idea that, like I said, we're kind of anti the idea that there's one super app that all experiences and all content exists in. That just doesn't make any sense for lots of reasons. And so users will come in through different application windows, but be linked, across that same application infrastructure. And I think, you made a really good point about persistence before. Those applications are going to come and go over time, just as they do today. It's like games that we played when I was a kid, a lot of them don't exist anymore. And that'll be the case in the future as well. And so that layer will change over time, but hopefully you've got an infrastructure layer below that allows persistence of things that I care about and I want to carry with me. It doesn't mean we won't have like large multiplayer environments for people to interact with. One of the 6 games we're working on the moment is an MMO style game, PvE game. And so you'll be able to have those experiences, but it's not the only thing that you'll experience on the Futureverse infrastructure.
Yeah, I think that's
and in terms of what getting a sense of what that looks like, there's going to be 2 things that are going to be really exciting coming up in the next quarter. One is you'll see the trailer for the Third Kingdom, which is this is alpha. I don't think I've said this to anyone else before.
I mean, you have to do it right.
The trailer for the Third Kingdom.
Yeah, so that'll come out, and that'll give people a sense of what that kind of more expansive player environment looks like, and what the utility looks like, and maybe some of the game loops in there that we think are pretty cool. And the other thing is we will have a full demo of the Futureverse kind of ecosystem operating with each other at the protocol level. So you've got you'll see like a chat between an AFA game and the burrows, or you'll see a digital identity being used to log into different applications, or you'll see an AFA match appear inside of the burrows environment. So kind of showing that interoperability across the infrastructure layer.
Interesting. Yeah. So you said it from the beginning in the white paper that the sexy stuff is not the infrastructure, but without that, there's nothing.
Yeah.
At what point did you realize you needed to go there? At what point did you realize that everything else that you might build on wasn't it for you?
It's kind of been a journey over the last 5 years. We did quite an intensive bit of research probably 6 months ago, leading up to the decision to launch the Root network, where we talked to a lot of different networks out there and did deep dives on the kind of technology side and infrastructure side and architecture with them. And where we landed up was we started this process by looking at what's the ideal user experience for new users to Web3, and then we went out and said, well, what technology needs to be there to deliver that user experience? And so when we looked at pretty much everything out there, it was basically Ethereum but cheaper gas. That's basically every other network architecture, and the user experience was basically the same across all of those. So the only way for us to actually solve for the user experience we wanted to do was to build something new.
Yeah, the comments are kind of going all over the place. I don't know if you're keeping up with them, but
I'm not. There's lots.
There's lots. It seems to me that people either They either get it or they don't. And I think
Yeah.
it's been a pretty decent conversation around all these parts of it. We are going to have to wrap it up now. Bruno, do you have any last thoughts, questions, comments for Aaron before we tidy this up?
Yeah, I would invite you to take a look at what we've built.
I have started to look at it. It's really impressive.
Awesome. I would love to take you through some of the functionality, show you around, click around with you, and show you what we have. It is a bit complicated right now. Our UX could definitely use some work given all the functionality, but I think it has really interesting potential, and I think there's a lot of collaboration that we can do here. So I would love it if we could explore further.
Yeah, definitely. I think we should set up a time with some of our engineers to do that.
Hey, look at that. We're making friends. We started off on some rocky footing, but I think ultimately the people that are going to take the first trembling steps in this space will learn so much and figure so much out. And it is not on us to criticize people for not having all the answers right now. What we are in the middle of is a process, and that process needs to be processed. It needs to be fought out and battled over and everything else. And I think expectations are always so high on teams to just deliver finished things, and it's not that. That's not Web3. Web3 is come and build, come and be part of it. You know?
Yeah, it's a giant experiment. Like, and you're 100% right. No one has all the answers. We've got a bunch of hypothesis and a bunch of experience, and we think we're going to try and solve some problems, and hopefully we do. But at the same time, I hope the rest of the people out there that are trying to solve problems are successful too, because that's how we progress the goals of Web3. It's not the tribalism that exists today is I think holding us back more than driving us forward. And the bigger problem is the rest of like what's happening in the world, not what's happening in our space. We're trying to solve those problems. We should be working together to do that. And we shouldn't be afraid to let people try and fail, because that's what drives innovation as well. Out of every cycle that's been through in technology has been built on people trying something and not working and learning from it. So we should encourage people to experiment and not jump on them if it doesn't work, because we're all in the same boat, and some of us are going to be lucky enough to crack the nut and others won't.
Equally, and this is the really important bit, we shouldn't be afraid of holding people to account and valid criticism. And the thing that I worry about more than anything else when I peruse Discord channels is how quickly you get into a kind of groupthink behavior and everything. It isn't necessarily a cult, but it starts to demonstrate elements of that behavior. And I think developers fall into the trap of thinking themselves godlike in that sense. It's really terrifying how quickly it can happen. So it's a difficult balancing act. And, as someone who works in news and media, the notion of the truth, it's a battle, right? It's a really hard thing. Like the moment I, make a video, it's already fiction. And there's no way around that. It's gonna be a fascinating time trying to figure this stuff out. But as long as we're having fun, and not killing anybody,
and trying to make a difference, and
trying to make a difference, absolutely. Well, listen, thanks so much, Aaron. Thanks so much, Bruno. Always a pleasure to have you on. I hope you guys managed to have a productive conversation outside of this.
Sure.
And if you're not aware of Remark, please do check them out. It's Remark, RMRK.app.
Exactly.
.app.
And fluff.world, nice and simple. But of course, the whole extended ecosystem of the party bears, the ray guns, you've got your bees, you've got your, I'm not going to say I'm not going to say it. So thanks very much. We'll see you next week for more of the same, but this was an absolute pleasure. Thanks again, guys, and see you soon.
Cheers.
Zeta Chain is the first public Layer 1 blockchain that natively connects with any chain and layer without wrapping or bridging assets. This unlocks a new class of omni-chain dApps, such as smart contract managed external assets, even on Bitcoin and Dogecoin, multi-chain NFT ownership, cross-chain DeFi apps, and much more. Check out their developer docs at zetachain.com and start building.